In June 2011, a leadership shakeup at Cedar Fair, the company that bought Knott's Berry Farm from the Knott family 14 years prior, changed the future of the park forever. The new Cedar Fair president, Matt Ouimet, was a 17-year industry veteran, having served as the president of the Disney Cruise Line and as president of the Disneyland Resort during its 50th anniversary celebration. Within 6 months, he was Cedar Fair's new CEO. He knew the value a park's history brought to a place like Knott's Berry Farm. But at the moment, a tangle of weeds in the form of steel roller coasters was choking out growth on the farm. Before we dive into this final Knott's history video, we'd like to thank the fine folks supporting us through Patreon. Specifically, we'd like to shout out Silver Connor and Jordan Ramey, who made this series happen. If you've enjoyed any of the videos in this series, please give them a thanks in the comments below. It's viewers like you that make in-depth theme park history series like this possible, and we really appreciate your support. If you'd like to join the people supporting the channel with a pledge of your own, please visit our Patreon page or sign up for a channel membership here on YouTube. Thank you for your consideration, and now, on with the last in our Archives series on Knott's Berry Farm. Sadly, one of the most important figures of Knott's Berry Farm history wouldn't be around to see how the new management team would handle the park. In January of 2011, Wendell Bud Hurlbut passed away after a short illness. Even after his direct connection to the park had faded, he'd kept a workshop across La Palma Avenue, where he worked on miniature trains and the like. He'd often said that one day, Knott's new management would get rid of his two major rides, the Calico Mine ride and the Timber Mountain log ride. After taking control at Cedar Fair, one of Matt Ouimet's first moves regarding Knott's Berry Farm was to appoint a new general manager for the park, Rafi Kapralian, a former Knott's employee and current general manager of another Cedar Fair park, Canada's Wonderland. Under this new leadership team, changes around the farm began quickly. They increased the budget of the park's gardening department and started working on replanting many of the park's trees and gardens that had been removed in the first decade of Cedar Fair's ownership. Maintenance and touch-ups to themed elements were also increased. Instead of focusing on what new thrill coaster to build, management focused on bringing the park back up to the standards it had under the Knott family. But this was just a taste of what was coming. During the following year, 2012, Charleston Circle, the center of the Roaring Twenties expansion, underwent refurbishment. The more than 45-year-old area was updated and modernized, with particular attention given to the fountain at its center. At the same time, the cracked asphalt walkways throughout Ghost Town were torn up and replaced with a new, more thematically appropriate aggregate surface, one that resembled an old gravel road without all the dust. The area around the Berry Market and Chicken Dinner restaurant was also cleaned and refreshed. The next year, 2013, saw the Boardwalk get the love it needed. Boardwalk was completely revamped and expanded, with a new Wild Mouse coaster replacing the Perilous Plunge Shoot the Chutes ride. While not a particularly special coaster, the new Coast Rider signaled that Knott's leadership also understood that many of the park's newer fans were drawn by their roller coasters. While they were aiming to restore the park's former glory, it wouldn't be at the cost of the newer thrill attractions or their fans. In December 2012, Knott's proved Bud Hurlbut right and closed the Timber Mountain log ride. Temporarily. Before former CEO Dick Kinzell's retirement, his management team had earmarked a significant budget for a large thrill coaster to go in Ghost Town. Instead, The new CEO we met's team used the money for a total overhaul on Timber Mountain Log Ride. After extensive renovations, upgrades, and added animatronics and effects, the Timber Mountain Log Ride reopened at the end of May in 2013. John Ethan Wayne, son of the Western movie star who helped his dad open the original version back in 1969, showed up to relaunch the refurbished ride. Garner Holt Productions, animatronics legends in the theme park industry, oversaw the ride's update, with the goal of reimagining the modern ride as what Bud Hurlbut would wish he could have done in the first place. That sense of respect for the ride's history proved extremely popular with both management and park fans, so the company was brought in the following year to give the same treatment to Hurlbut's first grand attraction, the Calico Mine Ride. In 2014, the Mine Ride closed for its major refurbishment and update, bringing the ride into the modern era, as well as refreshing many of the original effects that had been turned off over the years. And I normally don't editorialize too much in these history videos, but can I just say this new lighting on the show building absolutely looks amazing at night. I love the way the warm color temperature up lighting plays off the sculpted rockwork. It's just pretty. And the way it contrasts with the blue lighting on the waterfall and the dark night sky, it's spectacular. I mean, look at this thing, it's gorgeous. It also does sunsets pretty well too. And the Calico Mine Ride wasn't even the only major improvement for 2014. Camp Snoopy also got an overhaul, with some of its less thematically appropriate rides being replaced, others re-themed and refreshed, and the landscaping filled back in, making the greenery more in line with the area's original design. A permanent meet and greet spot was added for the Peanuts characters as well. But 2014 also brought sad news. In November, Marion Knott passed away at the age of 92. The final of the Knott children, the one born on the farm itself, the one that championed the theme park for so many years and helped bring it into the modern age of themed entertainment, was gone. As we noted a couple episodes ago, she does not have a Wikipedia page, and that's a travesty. Back on the farm, management wasn't just refreshing the old classics. Matt We Met launched a company-wide initiative called Amusement Dark. The goal was to develop high-quality dark rides for each of their parks, but at a fraction of the cost of similar Disney or Universal attractions. Knott's received its addition from this initiative in 2015, taking its place in the empty former home of Kingdom of the Dinosaurs and Knott's Berry Tales. Called Voyage to the Iron Reef, the ride had a pseudo-steampunk theme and featured interactive shooting elements, fairly similar to those on Men in Black, Alien Attack, Toy Story Mania, the Six Flags Justice League rides, etc. The ride was successful, and is notable for featuring several Easter eggs and references to the history of the farm in its scenes, which triggered when shot by riders. Among these were the Cordelia K steamboat, a Knott's Berry Tales ride vehicle, and the Roaring Twenties sign which sat atop the ride's show building for almost 4 decades. Cedar Fair closed Mrs. Knott's Chicken Dinner restaurant in the following January. After 2 months of work, the original 1930s restaurant building, along with its accumulated expansions, were brought up to modern standards. One room was adapted to evoke the original tea room with its small booths and intimate atmosphere. The larger dining rooms leaned into the theme of the farm's historic, homespun, rustic qualities. Overall, the restaurant's refurbishment mirrored the work done across the rest of the park, keeping the charm that made Knott's a success in the first place, while bringing its appeal up to par with the modern themed entertainment industry. In May of 2016, Rafi Kapralian was promoted to Regional Vice President of Cedar Fair, meaning he now oversaw Knott's and 4 other parks: California's Great America, Ohio's Cedar Point, Missouri's Worlds of Fun, and Michigan's Adventure. Former Disneyland Vice President John Storbeck was tapped to replace him. Like Kapralian, Storbeck grew up in Southern California and knew the importance of Knott's Berry Farm and its history to the area. This shift in leadership did nothing to slow the improvements at Knott's Berry Farm. Ghost Rider, celebrating its 18th year, was refurbished. To go along with the refresh, live actors once again returned to the streets of Calico and Ghost Town to celebrate the area's 75th anniversary. The event, dubbed Ghost Town Alive, returned each summer afterwards, reviving the tradition of live street theater that made Knott's Ghost Town unique back in the 1940s and 50s. It continues to this day, with guests joining interwoven stories told through participatory theater throughout the Ghost Town and Calico. Matt We Met stepped down as CEO of Cedar Fair in 2017, but retained the position of executive chairman. His successor was Richard Zimmerman, who made his career climbing the ranks of responsibility within the Cedar Fair organization. Yet again, the change in corporate leadership didn't prove disruptive to the Berry Farm's continued refresh. In 2018, the aging generic Boomerang was replaced with the Gerstlauer Infinity Coaster, HangTime. This new addition to the Boardwalk was meant to evoke the spirit of 1960s California surf culture, but its party piece was the illuminated track. At night, the synchronized lights toggled on and off to create an illusion of waves. And since we broke the editorial rule once already, I won't say anything this time and just let you enjoy how this thing looks at night. Around the time HangTime was getting underway, Garner Holt Productions were brought in for a third time, now to give the Bigfoot River Rapids a similar overhaul to what they'd done on the Timber Mountain Log Ride and Calico Mine Ride. In the years since its construction, much of the already limited Bigfoot-themed elements had been removed, leaving the ride lacking really anything in terms of theme or story. The ride's new storyline linked it to the story of Ghost Town, and it was renamed Calico River Rapids. In less than a decade, the new team at Cedar Fair had brought Knott's Berry Farm back to being a solid theme park with a cohesive park narrative, rather than a generic coaster-centric amusement park with aging vestiges of its old theming. The company and fans prepared to celebrate the park's Centennial anniversary. Walter Knott started his farm on this land with his cousin in 1920. Sure, it was a few years before he bought the land from its current owner, and at least another 2 decades before there was anything even resembling a theme park on the land. And it was probably another 2 decades after that before it became a true theme park with the addition of its first dark ride, the Calico Mine Ride in 1960. But 2020 was the 100th anniversary of a berry farm run by Walter Knott on this land, so Knott's Berry Farm decided to celebrate that occasion as their 100th anniversary. One of the centerpieces of this celebration would be the return of the Berry family with the Knott's Berry Tales Return to the Fair. The ride was announced to replace Voyage to the Iron Reef, and was more of a reskin of that attraction than anything entirely new. Original Berry Tales designer and former Disney Imagineer Rolly Crump was consulted on the ride's design, along with his son, Imagineer Chris Crump. Knott's used art drawn by both employees and fans in the queue. The boysenberry scent from the original ride returned in the first scene. The new ride's plot mirrored the plot of the original, and the scenes were broadly the same. As far as the interactive game elements, Iron Reef's freeze guns were rethemed to jam jars, with a pull string instead of a traditional trigger, a la Disney's Toy Story Midway Mania attraction. Guests shot targets to score points, as well as shooting the children of the ride's original villainous coyote, who, like their larcenous parent, were trying to steal the bear's boysenberry treats. Voyage to the Iron Reef closed in January 2020, with the ride's overhaul to be finished within a few months, and the new attraction to debut in time for the busy summer season. But as you probably already know, or at least have guessed by this point in the story, that didn't happen. On March 11th, the governor of California told residents to avoid large gatherings like sporting events, concerts, and of course, theme parks. Even Knott's updated safety protocols, published the next day on March 12th, didn't help. On March 13th, at the end of the day, Knott's Berry Farm closed indefinitely. 6 days later, the governor issued a statewide lockdown. Over the following 6 months, closures would cost Cedar Fair over $1 billion in potential revenue. Attendance shrank by 20 million guests across their parks, 2 of which are located in California. Raffi Kapralian, former Knott's manager and current regional vice president of Cedar Fair, told the Orange County Register, quote, "If we don't have hope as human beings, we have nothing. You have to have an optimistic outlook. You have to be positive about it. You have to be encouraging. A lot of our employees did not know what was going to happen or what was coming up around the corner. My job was to make sure that they stayed focused on what the tasks in front of us were, and then to be able to guide them through some of the unknowns." With restaurants allowed to partially reopen beginning in May and June, the management at Knott's decided to try something, anything, to keep the park afloat and employees paid. They reopened the park without any of the rides or shows operating. Instead, to draw guests, they introduced a series of Taste of food festivals, starting with Taste of Calico in July. Kapralian said of the event, "Our guests were thanking us for being open and for trying to give them some normalcy in their lives. To me, that goes a long way to show what our purpose is in life. That made me feel really good about why we exist." Knott's Berry Farm followed up the first food festival with Taste of Knott's in August, Taste of Fall-O-Ween in September and October, and Taste of Merry Farm for November and December. Overall, the special events drew hundreds of thousands of guests, a far cry from the millions in a typical year, but more than zero. In a weird way, the lockdown restrictions, instead of closing Knott's Berry Farm, had merely reverted it to an experience much like it was in the 1940s and early 50s, before any of the big iron rides, as Walter might have put it. The park was now just a few restaurants, gift shops, and berry market with a ghost town and themed areas for guests to wander around, much as Walter Knott once knew it. Indeed, there's shades of Walter's ingenuity in the idea to just shift gears and focus on providing food service to survive a perilous business environment. But only a week into December of 2020, the state of California issued another lockdown order. Knott's initially canceled a few weeks of the Merry Farm event, but when it became clear the order would stay in place through the New Year's holiday, they canceled the whole thing. Quote, "Our frustration is around the fact that we have some great protocols that we could have applied in California and still entertained our guests and kept our employees employed," Raffi Kapralian said. Cedar Fair's parks were open with those enhanced safety protocols in Texas, Missouri, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and North Carolina. Only their California parks remained closed going into 2021. It was February before the state lifted the lockdown order, which delayed a planned boysenberry-themed food festival until March. Universal Studios reopened its California park at 25% capacity on April 15th. Disney reopened the Disneyland Resort 2 weeks later. Knott's soft opened for annual pass holders on May 6th and fully reopened for the general public on May 21st, after 1 year, 2 months, and 8 days without operating as a theme park. The reopening day was both the launch of the delayed 100th anniversary celebration and the debut of the new Berry Tales ride, which received good reviews from fans and commentators. The subsequent year saw the park slowly return to normal operation, but with the new food festivals continuing throughout the year, becoming an annual tradition. In 2022, Montezuma's Revenge, the only remaining Schwarzkopf shuttle loop coaster in the US, closed for refurbishment, planned to return as Montezuma, the Forbidden Fortress, with improved theming and show elements. This was to be accompanied by a refresh of the entire Fiesta Village area, led by former Imagineer Jim Clark, with nods to Knott's history like the seal pool included. The Fiesta Village overhaul managed to go off without a hitch and opened in 2023, but the Montezuma coaster is still under refurbishment as of writing. Knott's has listed 2025 as the coaster's planned return. October 2023 was the 50th anniversary of the Knott's Scary Farm / Halloween Haunt event. Half a century after Bud Hurlbut put on a cheap gorilla suit and jumped out at riders on his Calico Mine ride, Knott's annual event has inspired nearly every single park in the industry to offer a similar event, and remains one of the top Halloween events in the world. Knott's celebrated the Scary Farm's anniversary by bringing back numerous shows and houses as nods to the event's past. The following month, on Thanksgiving, Bud Hurlbut's barn across the street from the park burned down. Knott's had sold the building to the city, and most of the historic items from Bud Hurlbut's decades of ride development had been auctioned off over a dozen years ago when he passed away. The Orange County Fire Authority said the cause of the fire was under investigation, but if the cause was ever determined, it appears no public news reports on it were made. In 2024, the Camp Snoopy area underwent another renovation, this time a bit more advanced than the cleanup and replanting job a decade prior. The major highlights were the replacement of the Timberline Twister, a very basic kiddie coaster that had been an opening day attraction for Camp Snoopy 40 years ago, with the new, more highly themed Snoopy's Tinderpaw Twister coaster. The Rocky Mountain Trucking Company and Grand Sierra Railroad rides were updated with more theming and renamed to Off-Road Rally and Beagle Express, respectively. Updates were also made to the Camp Snoopy store. Another of Camp Snoopy's opening day attractions was lost in the renovations, the Huff and Puff. A rail handcart ride that kids powered themselves, Huff and Puff was designed by Knott's veteran and former Disney Imagineer Eddie Sato, the same creator as the Wacky Soapbox Racers ride. Its closure allowed for the expansion of the updated off-road rally. Back in November of 2023, Cedar Fair announced they would merge with Six Flags. Matt Ouimet had stepped down from his role as executive chairman in September, but most of the current Cedar Fair executive team continued their roles in the newly merged company, including CEO Richard Zimmerman and CFO Brian Witherow, who had been the company's PR spokesman all the way back when they bought the Berry Farm from the Knott family. The companies officially merged on July 1st, 2024, retaining the name Six Flags Entertainment Corporation for the new company. They were now the single largest operator of amusement parks in the world, with 42 combined amusement and water parks. The merger likely bumped the company to third worldwide behind Disney and Universal in terms of revenue, based on combined recent performance of Cedar Fair and Six Flags. Knott's Berry Farm is an odd theme park. Not in its layout, function, or anything like that. In those ways, it's actually a pretty average and, frankly, small regional park, albeit with a much deeper history than, well, any others. But it's that very history that's so weird and makes the park so special even today. At one point, it was the last berry farm in Orange County, while simultaneously nationally famous for its produce and unique hybrid rootstock, the boysenberry. That farm, serving as the starting place for a successful chicken dinner restaurant, isn't all that odd. Most often, however, that immensely popular restaurant becomes a regional or maybe even national restaurant chain, with that original location bearing little resemblance to the modern brand, if it survives at all. But that didn't happen. Instead, the restaurant grew an odd roadside tourist trap around it, which then evolved into something like a living history exhibit, drawing comparisons to Henry Ford's Greenfield Village. Then it inspired the first theme park just up the road in Anaheim. And somehow, while trying to not chase that new park, but also while trying to stay relevant to tourists, it evolved into the third most popular theme park in the country for several decades straight. The story could have ended there. The changes in the industry, changing audience taste, and just time, bad economies. Well, any of it could have killed the park off. But the Knott family didn't cling to it, insisting they knew better because they built the place. They handed it off to a company that, despite missteps early on, ensured the park could survive even after being closed for more than a year. With the farm now one of dozens of parks in the Six Flags portfolio, it remains to be seen how it will fare in the future. 3.5 centuries ago, when looking down into the area that is now home to Knott's Berry Farm, Disneyland, and millions of people, Father Juan Crispy remarked about how fruitful and productive the land was. And a century ago, Walter Knott knew how right Crispy was. He grew something special there, something that could only have grown at that place in Southern California and at that time. I wonder what he would say if he saw what is growing out of that soil today. The next year, 2013, saw the Boardwalk get the love it. The next year, 2013, saw the Boardwalk get the love it needed. Boardwalk was completely